So we've seen how reason can help us achieve happiness, but what's really hard are the times when reason is not forthcoming with the right thing to do, when we feel torn and conflicted. How can we deal constructively with those times? Let's begin with a story from the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hindu text. In this story, a warrior named Arjuna is getting ready for battle, and the text says, "He surveyed his elders and companions in both armies, all his kinsmen assembled together. Arjuna slumped into the chariot and laid down his bow and arrows, his mind tormented by grief." In other words, he's experiencing this deep inner conflict. On the one hand, Arjuna is a warrior and he's called to fight, but on the other hand, he sees his kinsmen not only on his side, but also on the other side, and he says to himself, "How can I kill my own kinsmen?" It turns out in the story that Arjuna's charioteer, Krishna, is actually an avatar of the god Vishnu, and he says to him, "Be forever lucid, alive to yourself." In other words, know who you really are. And then he gives him a vision, showing that all things in the universe, including Arjuna, are actually part of the one cosmic consciousness of Vishnu. So within this perspective, the apparent conflict is actually part of a larger harmony. Now what this gets at is a simple fact of humanity. We have a wide variety of goals, and they're often in conflict. To decide what to do, we can use ethical reasoning, and there are plenty of different moral philosophies out there to help with that. But that's actually not what I want to talk about here. Instead, I want to talk about the experience of conflict in general, which is what Arjuna's story really gets at. How can we, as human beings forever torn in opposite directions, ever find happiness? Now, if the story of Arjuna doesn't quite trip your trigger, we can grasp the same basic point through an example much closer to home. A mother who must let her child fail. Let's say, for example, it's a toddler learning to walk. It falls over and falls over again and begins to cry. Now, if the mother's perspective is fairly narrow, all she may see is pain in her child. However, from an expanded perspective, the mother can see that this experience is a necessary part of the child's development. Just as in Arjuna's case, an expanded perspective grants the experience meaning. Now, the insight to be taken away here is that broadening your perspective in this manner often lends meaning even to unpleasant experiences, such as inner conflict. There is a larger meaningful context from which to see virtually any situation that we find ourselves in, and historically, religion has often been the supplier of that larger perspective, but it is not the only potential source of such meaning. Naturalism, too, provides a broader meaningful context. For example, conflict can be seen as part of the impersonal web of cause and effect unfolding throughout big history, which is also called the epic of evolution, or the universe story. And it refers to the entire history from the point of the Big Bang up to the present, and everything in the cosmos, no matter how small, yes, even us, has a chapter in that great drama. There's a great deal of conflict in the universe, of course. If we look at the galaxy on the left, we know that there are stars colliding with other stars in great violence. But from the zoomed out perspective we have here, we can also see that all of that works together to produce something that we can perceive as beautiful. Naturalism provides that kind of meaningful perspective. As small as we are in comparison to the cosmos, our lives find context within its patterns. From supernovae seeding the universe with the heavy elements that make life possible, to evolution shaping us over countless generations into what we are today. This brings us to another example that we're all too familiar with. We know from an evolutionary perspective that our legacy has bequeathed to us all manner of instincts and urges. If we look at the black and white image on the top here, even without knowing anything about the plot of this particular movie, we can easily guess that there's some kind of a standoff between those two men, and there's a very good chance that it has something to do with that woman on the left. It's not difficult to see how this human situation is very similar to the one below of two male deer fighting to win a mate. Why would we do this? Why risk insult and injury to impress a potential mate? This doesn't make any sense. From a person's eye view, by which I mean our normal perspective, the perspective that we identify with as us, as me, it seems irrational if we have a goal of personal happiness. Why put ourselves through that? But there's another view, a broader view. From a gene's eye view, it's completely rational, because it enhances our goal of fitness and ultimately reproduction. Kenrick and Griskevicius talk about this as deep rationality. Even our behaviors that appear irrational on the surface have a kind of rationality, deep rationality, when we look at it from the genetic perspective. And we can honor that. We honor it by simply acknowledging that our irrational so-called behaviors have evolved for a reason, or at the very least, find a place in the unfolding drama of evolution. To honor our deep rationality is to place our evolved behaviors within a larger meaningful context, thereby granting them a sense of meaning. It's not to say that they are good or bad, per se, but rather that we can find a perspective within which even the unpleasant aspects of our human nature are meaningful. Just as Arjuna discovers a perspective from which the immediate conflict on the battlefield is ultimately part of a larger harmony, so too can we see immediate conflicts of human nature as part of a larger evolutionary picture. Yet, this same line of thinking can lead us into an even bigger tangle. When we start to think about genes and us and happiness and fitness, suddenly it can start to look like, wait a minute, our goals of personal happiness and our genetic fitness goals are in conflict. From the gene's perspective, it's totally acceptable if we suffer, so long as it enhances our fitness. And at this point, we start to feel a little like Arjuna set against ourselves. We feel this conflict of the genes versus me, and we might even feel a bit like the genes have us, like puppets on a string. But this is entirely an illusion. There's no such dichotomy as genes versus me. This is a kind of cognitive illusion called mind-body dualism. It feels like there are two parts of us, mind and body, because only one part of it is conscious, and we tend to identify with that part of it. That part is our mind. We experience everything, including our own body, through the mind, and can experience it no other way. But we never experience the perspective of our genes. We can't. So we feel like there are these two parts. However, the view of naturalism is that mind and body are one whole. Although we feel like two things, we, our true selves that is, are both, and both comprise one single being. If we could experience in our field of consciousness the whole system, what would we see? We would see a many-layered process of all kinds of goals competing, but competing in a dynamic harmony that comes together to produce the behavior of a single being. And the extent to which we can bring ourselves to see that broader perspective is the extent to which we can experience a kind of serenity as we observe it. This is what all the sages down through the ages have pointed at. A state of mind that transcends the particularities, dichotomies, and conflicts of existence and reconciles them into a larger harmony. We remain very much in the thick of it, experiencing the unpleasantness of inner conflict, but at the same time, we may also find a kind of peace within conflict, order in chaos, stillness in motion. Naturalism, no less than any other view, offers this kind of transcendent experience. So, to sum up, how can we find happiness as beings forever torn in opposite directions? First, we can set the situation into a larger meaningful context. Our perspective thereby expands to encompass both the pleasant and the unpleasant within a circle of meaningfulness. Then, we can approach the particular situation from this expanded perspective, applying whatever moral philosophy we find best. And if we do that, in addition to whatever we may be feeling at the time, pleasant or unpleasant, we may also experience a kind of serenity in motion. And so, on some level, we can agree with the advice that Krishna gave to Arjuna: be forever lucid, alive to yourself. Know who you really are in the broadest context.